Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Caregiver Burnout and Compassion Fatigue in the Midst of the COVID Pandemic. I'm assuming that most of you who have joined us today serve as a caregiver in some capacity in your life. As we go through the introduction today, if you don't mind in the chat window, just letting Adam and I know just a little bit about who you are, whether you are a healthcare provider, maybe a parent with a special needs child or adult, a caregiver of an older adult, a support worker, or whatever capacity it is that you caregive in, so that we can get a sense of who is here with us today. I am Nicole Imgrund, and I am the owner and director of River's Edge Counseling Center here in St. Albert. We always do these Wellness Matters talks a couple of times a month, usually in our center, but right now we're happy for an opportunity to meet with you wherever you are through this webinar format. Our team of therapists, over 20 counselors and psychologists, see clients, adults, couples and families. And these days we are seeing them all remotely by video or telephone. Our presenter today is Adam Sartore, and he is one of our 5 practicum students, just finishing his Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology through Yorkville University. Adam's background is really varied, but he has worked in different contexts supporting children with special needs, teens and families, all affected by complex trauma. And in that work, he came to really appreciate how supportive relationships can help humans of all ages build resilience and overcome challenging life experiences. Adam also, a really interesting part of who he is a singer and a theater performer. And it's given him a special interest in how creative self-expression and engaging in meaningful passions can increase coping skills and build resilience and deepen human connection. And now in his counseling practice, he strives to create a supportive and attuned therapeutic relationship to provide each client with the experience of being seen and feeling heard and accepted just as they are. And to do that, he draws on techniques from a variety of approaches, including dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness, positive psychology, and narrative therapy. And on a personal note, I just want to say what a pleasure it's been to have Adam with us on his practicum. I really feel so fortunate that we've had him the last 8 months, and he's committed to a whole year with us. So we get to have him, and he'll continue to serve our clients and be part of our team right through to fall. So thank you for your work with our clients and for your presentation today, Adam. We will, in the middle of Adam's presentation, we'll stop at some point, give a sense of who people are, not by name, but just sort of what background people have. So continue to let us know in the chat. Also, there's a Q&A section. And so please post as we go any questions that you have, and we will get to them in the Q&A. But in particular, Adam is wondering if you would make a comment also about what challenges that we face as helpers during COVID. That's sort of unique to this time. And at one point in his presentation, we will just list some of those off. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. So today we're going to talk about compassion fatigue and burnout as helpers, and just in the specific context of COVID-19. Just a quick agenda for today. So first, we're going to learn how to spot the signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue and burnout. We can't change or prevent what we don't know, so it can be helpful to know the signs and symptoms of both of those. Secondly, we're going to learn some practical strategies to help manage compassion fatigue and burnout during COVID. And also, as Nicole mentioned, we'll provide a space at the end to ask questions about the unique challenges you face as helpers. I've also included a couple slides that we'll go through just before the question period with some resources just to specific helper populations. So healthcare providers, caregivers caring for special needs children or adults, and also resources for caregivers of older adults as well. So now I'll just ask Nicole just to highlight some of the diversity of our audience. So first I'll just preface it by saying that helpers come in many forms. Each one is needed, each one is appreciated.
Yeah. Well, we've got some nice variety here. We have a couple of people with a social work background, someone who works in Alberta Health Services in addiction and mental health, a professional in social programs, a couple of educators, a couple of people who work at the Brain Care Center, not for profit for brain injury survivors. They connect clients to a variety of resources. A supervisor at a center for homeless men with and without mental concerns and addictions. Some people are noting their parents. They are parents with some with special needs childs, high energy children. We have, a few registered nurses, school counselor, a couple of people who are caregiving for spouses who, a spouse who suffered a stroke, caring for elderly parents, a couple more educators as well. Yeah, so quite a variety.
Yeah.
Yeah, one more here, coach and caregiver. Yeah, good. Well, welcome to all of you. And it's quite something that you're taking a bit of time today for your own self-care. So, yeah.
Thank you for being here. And yeah, that really just captures the diversity of what it means to be a helper. So first I want to start with a myth buster. So compassion fatigue is a sign that I'm failing as a healthcare provider or a caregiver. So maybe just think for yourself if you think that is true or false. So that is false. Compassion fatigue is commonly referred to as the cost of caring. It's a common consequence of empathizing with the suffering of another human being. It is in no means a failure on your part as a helper, as a caregiver. So one of the key traits of being a caregiver, of being a healthcare provider, a helper in general, is empathy. So our ability to connect with the suffering of another person can also make us vulnerable to compassion fatigue, to burnout. So again, it's really just setting a clear boundary that compassion fatigue is not your fault. It's just one of the consequences, one of the costs of being in a caring role. So I think this quote really kind of highlights that and sort of validates just the cost of carrying, the difficulty of being a helper. So this is from Rachel Riemann. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. So as helpers, as caregivers, a lot of the time we are surrounded by pain, suffering, trauma, and eventually it does take a toll on our own well-being. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the best ways that we can prevent compassion fatigue and burnout, one of the ways that we can also learn to take care of ourselves is by knowing what compassion fatigue is, knowing what burnout is. In the research I did, there's a lot of mixed definitions and there's some overlap. Probably the most clear definition I can provide of compassion fatigue is just that it's sort of the negative consequence of caring, and that it doesn't uniquely affect one healthcare profession. It's commonly seen in healthcare workers across different roles. It's also common in caregivers. I like this definition of compassion fatigue because it again, we are going to pick up the emotional suffering of others, but it really just highlights that compassion fatigue usually happens when we have difficulty separating ourselves from the trauma or the suffering of someone else, or it's when that starts to take over, when we become over preoccupied with it. Sometimes compassion fatigue can also be referred to as secondary traumatic stress. That usually is when a person has witnessed someone else suffering a trauma, or even just supporting a patient or a loved one who has experienced trauma, and just hearing them share traumatic information. There's lots of different symptoms that are and warning signs that are associated with compassion fatigue. This one chart captures a lot of them. It's from the US Department of Health and Human Services. I really like how it sort of highlights that compassion fatigue affects us in so many different ways. So in our cognition, so it can lead to rigid thinking. We can ruminate or become preoccupied with trauma or the suffering of another. We can develop perfectionist tendencies. In extreme forms of compassion fatigue, we can also develop a sense of apathy or even a loss of compassion for others. Emotional toll, it can lead to numbness, to sadness, feeling helpless. I think two emotions that I think may stand out in this time are the feeling of helplessness, the feeling of guilt. So knowing that a lot of things with coronavirus are out of our control right now, feeling that we wish we could do more, and that helplessness can also tie into the guilt. So even though as helpers, we're likely doing everything we can to take care of our patients, to take care of our loved ones, we can begin to feel guilty if there's things out of our control, and wishing that we did more, that we aren't doing enough, that kind of thing. So behavioral symptoms, social withdrawal, sleep disturbance. You'll notice that if there is exposure to traumatic content or working with survivors of trauma, compassion fatigue can also include some symptoms that do mirror those of PTSD. So that can be hypervigilance, elevated startle response. And then here's just sort of captures the variety of physical symptoms as well. So compassion fatigue does place caregivers and healthcare providers at risk of increased physical illness, so increased cardiovascular disease risk. Just one of the main reasons for that is because when we are consistently exposed to trauma, to suffering, we're kind of in a consistent state of fight or flight. So we have a consistent stress response. So that can really impair our immune system, impair our body's functioning. So again, by sharing this, the purpose isn't to scare you, but it's just to highlight sort of the complexity of compassion fatigue and how it affects us. So again, sometimes burnout and compassion fatigue can be used interchangeably. Compassion fatigue really, from my understanding and the research I've done, can happen suddenly, so after exposure to one traumatic event, or it can also develop over time, and it can occur with or without trauma. So even just supporting, being empathetic and supporting others can lead to compassion fatigue. Burnout usually happens gradually over time. Just like compassion fatigue, it doesn't discriminate. It affects caregivers, healthcare workers alike. And it also shares a lot of the symptoms that overlap with compassion fatigue. Three of the defining features, which I found, I think, really capture what burnout looks like, are exhaustion. So that's complete exhaustion, emotional and physical exhaustion, developing sort of a cynical outlook. So that could be some detachment from work, detachment from those we care for. And then I think the third one is really key. So that's really feeling a sense of lack of accomplishment, feeling that we aren't helping enough. That relates to some of the guilt that we might experience if we see our loved one or our patients are continuing to suffer, they're not getting better. This slide kind of captures some of the social impacts of compassion fatigue and burnout, and I hope it provides argument for why this research is so important and why these conversations about compassion fatigue and burnout are really important. So there's a lot of research showing that helpers and caregivers can be at increased risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide. It can also lead to increased relational strain and interpersonal conflict. Some helpers, when they're exposed to a lot of stress, a lot of trauma, they may lean on alcohol and substance use, and that can have its own personal and social impacts as well. As we previously discussed, there can also be an increased risk of physical illness in helpers. And then the last one, I think, just kind of captures sort of the occupational or professional impacts of compassion fatigue and burnout. It's been shown to lead to higher turnover rates with staff, impaired professional judgment, and patients also can suffer sometimes as well and feel dissatisfied. So now I just want to open the floor to you, and I'll get Nicole just to kind of capture some of the different challenges that as helpers you are facing during this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a few words to the comments there and kind of get a sense of it. Yeah. Just as people are typing, I'll say one of the ones that I notice is just the elevated stress and uncertainty in my personal life that's coinciding with the caregiving and professional work that I already do. So I'll be interested in seeing ways that, depending on the kind of work you do, that your caregiving, the stress of your job is elevated because of COVID, but I find just even that synchronicity of it all happening in your personal life at the same time. Yes, someone said so much more work, hard to get away from it. Floods of requests for help. Scope of the role becomes blurred, helping in ways we haven't helped before, trying to help as many people as possible. Wow, yes, she captured a lot of really important ones there. Difficulty removing myself from COVID-19 information. It literally controls every aspect of my work and personal life. Feeling inept at times. Oh, a colleague and I were talking about that yesterday, that so much is new that many of us that, developed a certain sense of confidence in our practice feel like beginners again. And that's difficult, especially at this time. Despite working at home now, work is extending into after hours because it seems like constant crisis mode and usual resources aren't available. Oh, some really important ones in there. Yeah, that heightened level of crisis and not having what you need to do your job effectively. Changing policies and procedures at work and the way we interact with clients, as well as much more work online and on the computer, which is hard. Oh, with all the screen time, a lot about Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue right now to read about. With my child, it's hard with the change in routine and keeping him busy. I realized how much I relied on kids' activities and play dates for human connection and fun. Isn't that true for parents too? Concern about my own personal safety while working and fear of infecting my elderly dad, missing my own children and grandchildren due to my exposure. Oh, what a loss. Yeah. Not giving myself time to reflect on how I'm doing, having to support others professionally and having no support personally. Wow, that's heavy to see all of that there. Yeah, coaching people already dealing with terrible anxiety, now layered with this anxiety, compound anxiety like compound grief. Absolutely. There's so much on our plates, working from home, caring for children, homeschooling, missing the physical connection with clients, no space and feeling little support personally. Stress and worries of those I haven't heard from and we are unable to connect with, having PTSD on top of it all. Oh, it's really hard reading all of that.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone for sharing. I think it just captures the complexity of this time. And I think in this next slide, I have some of the common impacts that I have experienced and also have heard from friends, from clients, from colleagues. Some words that I might add are, I think, just that idea of juggling. So juggling so much. And I think as helpers, having to constantly wrestle with our own fear, our own anxiety, and then also having to go out into the workforce or be a caregiver at home and to have to put on that hat and stay strong for others, that just can take so much out of us. So some of the ones that I found, which I think were echoed in some of the responses, were a loss of patients or loved ones. So that could be grief that's already happened. I think a term that's been floating around a lot in response to this time is anticipatory grief. So that's sort of the idea of just that fear of the unknown, if we will lose loved ones, if we will ever be able to go back to some state of normalcy. So sort of the endless what ifs. What if I get sick? What if my loved one gets sick? What if I infect my family? What if I never get to see my friends again? It's a time of just lost connection and a lot of uncertainty. And then I think this was captured as well. So isolation. So as helpers or as caregivers, constantly supporting others, and then due to the social distancing restrictions, having decreased access to social support. As healthcare providers, and I know constantly going into the hospital and treating patients, caring for others, imagine there's a lot of fear, not only for your own health, but fear for the health of your family as well. I'm hearing too from the comment thread, longer hours, more demands being placed, doing things outside of the scope of practice, having to constantly adapt to new technology. So I think just increased demands and less time for self-care, less time for sleep. Crisis mode was brought up. I think definitely myself, I can speak to a little bit of brain fog, and I think constantly being in this state of sort of fight or flight, being in survival mode. So I know that that's not all of the experiences, and thank you for those who shared and added some of the other just really difficult impacts of this coronavirus. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the things that we can really do as helpers to protect ourselves against compassion fatigue and burnout. The first is peer support. So as caregivers, that might look like being connected to other caregivers. It might look like joining a caregiver support group. It might look like staying engaged with other caregivers on social media. As healthcare professionals, it's really going to be connecting with other healthcare providers. Some of you may have access to supervision. There's a lot of research showing that good peer support is one of the strongest protective factors against compassion fatigue and burnout. Compassion satisfaction, I'll dive into that a little bit deeper, but really ultimately it's finding meaning and finding purpose in our role as helpers. Setting healthy boundaries for ourselves. So part of that is learning what isn't within our control and what is out of our control as we navigate this pandemic, which can be hard to do. There's a lot of research showing that practicing self-compassion, practicing mindfulness, those are also protective factors against compassion fatigue and burnout. And the last one, practicing self-care, I'll just add a disclaimer for that I know that is really challenging as a helper and a caregiver during this time. So I hope to provide a couple examples of just some really quick and practical tools that you can kind of build some self-care breaks into your daily schedule. So when we talk about peer support and finding spaces, my hope is that for each of us, as we navigate all these complex emotions, grief, fear, uncertainty, that we're able to find supportive spaces, people in our lives that we can talk to. This picture, I think, I share with some of my clients, and it provides a helpful metaphor about sort of a distress puddle versus a distress pond. And the key principle here is that as humans, we sometimes have a tendency or an impulse to get rid of, to suppress, to escape. So one example is hunger. So when we feel hungry, we want to eat. When we feel thirsty, we want to drink. When we feel cold, we want to warm up with a blanket. And the same can be said for when we experience pain, when we experience negative emotions like sadness, grief, fear, anxiety. A lot of the time we want to escape those feelings. We might want to numb them. Sometimes we might ruminate about them and let them take over. So I just wanted to find that some ways of coping with the emotions can be detrimental to our well-being. So that can be avoiding, numbing, suppressing, over-identifying with those emotions, ruminating with them. And I think this analogy of the distress puddle really highlights that as difficult as it is to accept and embrace some of those challenging feelings in the moment, if we're able to reach out for support, if we're able to just notice our feelings, give space for them, we'll be able to walk through them. And just as this image of this boy, it's a lot easier to walk through a puddle than it is through a pond, right? So the more we can accept them in the moment and then reach out for support and then let those emotions go, the easier it'll be to walk through them. But if we escape, if we numb, if we avoid, or if we let that emotion take over, then that puddle over time will grow and grow into a pond, which will be difficult to walk through. So the key takeaway is don't let the puddle turn into a pond. So finding people, finding spaces where we can talk about our feelings is one of the ways that we can prevent that puddle from turning into a pond. Focusing on compassion satisfaction. So I know right now when we are facing so much uncertainty and fear, it can be difficult to find the meaning, the joy in compassion and being a helper. Some of the things that I think can be helpful to help shift gears away from the negative sides of helping, the burnout, the compassion fatigue is looking towards compassion satisfaction. And there's a lot of research showing that this is one of the ways, it's almost like the antidote to compassion fatigue is compassion satisfaction. So that's really finding that meaning, that purpose. As caregivers, that can be finding moments of joy, moments of happiness, giggles with kids, moments of just sharing a memory, looking at photos with an older adult that you're caring for. Really just taking the time to embrace the positive, embrace those small pockets of joy and happiness with our patients, with the people that we're caring for. Reminding ourselves of the greater meaning, the greater purpose. So sometimes it's just maybe reflecting, writing down, why did I choose to become a helper? And that can remind us of our greater purpose in these roles. Also, when we're feeling helpless, when we're feeling some guilt that we're not doing enough, it's really taking the time to celebrate our successes. So, and celebrating small wins, right? So maybe it's going to a grocery store and being able to have less meltdowns with a special needs child, being able to support them through that, getting groceries successfully. Maybe it is having a patient recover from coronavirus, right? So in a time of so much uncertainty, so much grief, so much helplessness, it's really important to celebrate just how difficult it is to be a helper under normal circumstances and how difficult it is during these unprecedented times. And I think the last point is really important. So remembering that every act of kindness, every act of compassion matters. Also social distancing, some people will reframe it, place it from the perspective of that in itself is an act of compassion. It's really hard to be away from our loved ones, but it's another way that we are caring and we're really showing compassion for those we care about. The next tool is setting healthy boundaries for yourself and for others. It's really just being really clear about what is within our control, what is out of our control. Again, it's really easy to get caught up in the actions of others, to ruminate on the what ifs. How long will this last? How long will the virus stay? but ultimately we can only control sort of our own actions, our own behaviors, how we are with others, so the kindness and grace we show. There's some good ones here about just limiting social media, turning off the news, so just looking for relevant sources, but really trying to limit our exposure to too much news, too much negativity. Also, ultimately, we can only control our own social distancing. We can't control others. We can encourage others to social distance, but knowing that ultimately it's just our own actions we can control. Kind of a general metaphor that I like to use for this, for what's within our control, what's out of our control, is just to think of a traffic jam, right? So we all hate being stuck in a traffic jam, and none of us can change or control how we got there, or the fact that we're in a traffic jam, but we can definitely change how we decide to be in that moment, right? So we can accept that this traffic jam sucks, we might be late for work, and at the same time, we can just try to let it go, maybe turn on some of our favorite music, just try to breathe, to pause in that moment. So the next protective factor is practicing self-compassion. Two of the leading self-compassion researchers, Christopher Germer, Kristen Neff, I think these are really helpful quotes. So just knowing that a moment of self-compassion can change your entire day, a string of such moments can change the course of your life. And then ultimately, I think the most straightforward definition of self-compassion from Dr. Kristen Neff is treating ourselves as we would treat a good friend. So Dr. Neff talks about 3 elements of self-compassion. The first is practicing self-kindness. So that's really just imagining ourselves, like how we are, our state of being when we are with a friend or loved one in need, accepting ourselves just as we are. So if we are suffering or we are experiencing a really rough moment, just to name that and to know that it's okay. We can say to ourselves, this is a moment of suffering, this is a moment of pain, this is hard. And simply by naming that, by validating that, it can allow us to work through that pain, to accept it and then let it go, instead of judging it, diminishing it, or avoiding it. So it's really just validating, being gentle with ourselves, asking ourselves what we need in that moment. The second piece, which I think in this time is really powerful, because it's almost, there's a metaphor or analogy that I've heard about this as sort of like a global trauma or a global grieving process. And I think as we are each going about our own journey with coronavirus, our own feelings of grief, of loss, of uncertainty, one choice is we can keep to ourselves, we can stand alone in our pain and in our suffering, or we can just embrace the fact that pain, grief, loss, they're difficult, and they're also very human. So there is nothing wrong with us experiencing pain, experiencing grief. These are just part of what makes us human, and I think it can be really empowering to find a sense of common humanity. So sharing our suffering with others that we trust in support groups, other peers or colleagues at work, other caregivers, other trusted family members or friends, it can really allow us to find peace and just to embrace our shared human experience. The last one speaks to mindfulness. And so mindfulness is really just accepting feelings as they come, noticing them without judgment. So we're not going to linger on them. We're not going to let them take over. We aren't going to try to shut them down. We're just going to notice them, just to say to ourselves, okay, this is the thought I'm having right now. Just notice it and then let it go. I know letting it go can be the difficult part sometimes. So two metaphors which I found helpful, just in terms of this mindful awareness, observing our thoughts and our feelings without judgment. The first is imagining a house visitor. So we can think of ourselves like a house, and emotions might come knocking at the door. If we keep the door closed, they're going to keep knocking. The knocks might get louder. So we want to invite them in. We want to really just understand what they're trying to communicate to us. So are they communicating that we're in danger? Are they reminding ourselves of a trigger or something from the past that caused us pain? Are they maybe communicating a need that's not being met? Are we not feeling supported? Are we not feeling heard or validated? So really just noticing that emotion, letting that visitor come in, we can understand it. And then just like any house guest, we don't want them to outstay their welcome. We want to let them go on their way. So we're just going to notice them, understand maybe how the emotion is presenting in our body, understanding what it's trying to communicate to us, and then letting it go back out into the world. And then in terms of thoughts, one of the metaphors which I think is really helpful to think about is just to imagine a wave coming into the shore. We're going to notice that thought, and then let that wave go back into the sea. So not let it stay too long. So I think those, I hope, can be two helpful metaphors just to think of the kind of the curious observer looking at things without judgment, which is really a core of mindfulness. The next skill I want to share with you is an acronym. It comes from DBT, Dialectical Behavior Therapy, and it's ABC, please. And really, the core principle here is that by taking care of our physical health, we reduce our vulnerability to emotional pain, emotional distress. And then also by really just planning ahead, by finding positive moments, allowing ourselves to experience positive emotions, also doing things that give us a sense of accomplishment, that those can really help us manage some of those distressing emotions. So accumulating positive emotions can be just quality time with our loved ones. It can be doing something we enjoy, watching our favorite show. There's so many different ways that we can accumulate those positive emotions. And the more that we accumulate them, even just moments at a time, the more that can help tip the scale or balance some of those negative emotions that we're feeling. Building mastery, that just looks like doing something that challenges us, doing something that builds a sense of accomplishment. So when we're feeling sort of powerless, when we're feeling hopeless, or that we're not doing enough as a helper or a caregiver, maybe it's re-engaging in a hobby, maybe it is writing or drawing, getting back into playing an instrument, doing something that reminds us that we are capable, that we are strong, that we are resilient, and that can help us kind of be able to return to that helping or caregiving role with a sense of purpose, with a sense of confidence in ourselves. Coping ahead of time, that really involves just looking towards upcoming difficult moments, challenging conversations, that kind of thing. There's a lot of research showing that if we visualize ourselves walking through that difficult moment in the future, coping effectively, so practicing mindfulness, using I need statements to communicate how we're feeling. If we imagine ourselves sort of walking through that difficult moment, having that difficult conversation, when that moment comes around, if we are prepared for it, if we plan for it, if we visualize us getting through it effectively, the actual moment can feel less scary. And then the please, just a helpful acronym, which again shows that one of the best ways to kind of reduce our vulnerability to emotional distress is by treating our body with kindness. So that's if we're sick, staying home, getting care, balancing our eating, limiting alcohol or substance use, trying to find a balanced sleep routine. I know that can be challenging, and getting exercise. And again, even just getting outside and walking for 10 minutes a day, that's a start. So any little thing we do matters, and any little thing helps. So now I'm just going to do a short exercise with you, which I think can be really helpful when we're constantly in this state of survival mode, constantly in a state of fight or flight. And so I'll just invite each of you to close your eyes or to softly look at the ground. And this exercise is called Finding My Calm Place. Just taking a moment to tune into our breath, breathing in deep into our belly, breathing out, finding a rhythm for our breath that's slow and comfortable. If you notice there's any thoughts or lingering worries, you can imagine the wave metaphor. So the thought is coming into the shore. Just notice it. Don't judge it. Let it go back out into the sea, bringing your focus back to your breath. And on the next inhale, I invite you to call to mind an image of a place. This could be a place from memory, from a past travel, or it could be a place from your imagination. A place that makes you feel calm, gives you a sense of peace. As you imagine yourself walking into this place, take a moment to really take in the colors, the sights, the sounds. What does this place smell like? Are you outside? Are you inside? Is it nighttime or daytime? Really allowing yourself to take in what it feels like to be in this safe place. Allowing yourself to take in the stillness, the calmness of this place. You may also offer yourself some compassionate touch by placing your hand on your chest or on your heart, allowing yourself to take in this moment of peace, this moment of calm in your day. As a helper, you too deserve to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel the kindness and compassion that you so willingly share with others. Allow yourself to fully take in this moment of compassion and kindness, to enjoy the stillness, the peace of this safe place, remembering that you can come to this place anytime, anywhere. This place is for you. It can help you escape from stress, uncertainty, fear, grief, anything that you might be feeling. Just on your next few inhales, taking in the sights, the sounds, the colors, the smells of this safe place. Slowly opening your eyes and just noticing if anything has changed in your body. Maybe you feel more relaxed, you feel more calm, maybe some tension has slipped away. So this is a really helpful exercise, just if you are feeling that you're constantly in survival mode, to find some inner resources within yourself, your breath, your imagination, to help you create a sense of calm, a sense of peace in your day. This one I'll just go through briefly. So we do have our senses, which can also be really good resources to take care of ourselves. So soothing our five senses, so using the sense of sight, the sense of sound, the sense of smell, touch, and taste, and really just finding different ways that we can really soothe, that we can take care of those senses. So sight could be reading a book, watching our favorite show, taking in a beautiful scenery of nature, looking at old photos, old memories. Sound, listening to our favorite music, listening to calming nature sounds, doing guided meditation. Smell, essential oils, bubble baths, lighting incense. Those are all examples. There's more, obviously. And then touch, really indulging in a hot shower, exercising, cuddling with a pet, or with a loved one that we're isolating with, and playing an instrument. Also offering ourselves a hug. So sometimes we can use our own sense of touch to offer ourselves some warmth and compassion. And the last one, taste. So that can be treating ourselves, indulging in candy or chocolate, our favorite food, just really taking a moment to savor that taste, pouring ourselves some coffee or tea in the morning, maybe adding in a special creamer, that kind of thing, just taking that moment to really let ourselves enjoy it and to savor the taste, to savor the smell of that fresh cup of coffee, or that favorite food we like to eat, that kind of thing. Yeah. The last one I'll leave you with is, I think, an exercise that I had the experience of doing a few months ago, and it was really powerful to open this letter for my future self in the middle of coronavirus. And in January, I could have never predicted that we would be here now. So I think sometimes when we talk about self-care in this time of so much uncertainty and grief and stress, it can be hard to just imagine how what we're doing now to cope, to keep going through the days, how that's really going to serve us and help us build resilience, build strength for the future. So I think writing a letter to our future self is one of the ways that we can kind of create a sense of certainty, knowing that we will have this letter to open and look forward to, and also being able to, in the future, look back at what we did in this time to get by, to survive, just the incredible compassion and strength and perseverance that each of us show as helpers. So I think I have some writing prompts here. Ultimately, it's just setting some time aside to write yourself a letter, placing the letter and sealing it in an envelope, choosing a date in the future, maybe a month from now, a couple months from now, and writing that date on the envelope, keeping it in a safe place so that you can open it in the future. And then here I have some lists of self-care. I won't go through each of them for the sake of time, but it's really, I like the analogy of pockets. So finding pockets, moments of self-care in our day. I think especially leaving hospitals, leaving work environments, really using driving as a way to unwind, maybe listening to our favorite music. At home, finding moments to unplug. Also indulging when we need to. So in our favorite TV show, spending quality time with our loved ones. Another helpful kind of external reminder when we're stressed at work or we're just having a really hard day is that we can actually keep sort of a physical reminder. So maybe a photo of our loved one in our wallet or on our phone background. Also, if you found that safe place exercise was helpful, sometimes you may say it's a mountain scene, which is your safe or calm place. You might put a photo of a mountain scene as your background for your phone display, just so if you're having a hard time really finding a sense of calm or peace in your day, then you have that physical reminder of that safe place, and that can be an invitation for you to go there for a couple moments. So briefly, I will just share some resources for caregivers of special needs children and adults. Bruce Perry, he has sort of the idea that the first step is we have to regulate ourselves and allow our kids and those we're caring for to regulate. And then we want to relate with our right brain, connect. And so the last step is reasoning. So when we're in an emotion mind, it's hard to reason or rationalize. So first we want to regulate and then relate through our right brain. The River's Edge also has some great talks already on the website for pandemic parenting, positive pandemic parenting, talking to your kids about the big stuff. This website here has some, Child Bright Network has some really great resources for families with children with disabilities and special needs. Lots of great resources which you can check out. Caregivers Alberta. So all these resources will be posted when the webinar gets uploaded to at the end of today's presentation. And just quickly, I will go back to, or go through the next slide. So for healthcare professionals, this professional quality of life scale, if you're interested in just kind of assessing where you're at in terms of compassion fatigue and burnout, this is a really good tool just to kind of assess where you're at, and also the level of compassion satisfaction that you have in your job as well. And yeah, more River's Edge talks are happening. Some are already uploaded on the website. The Psychologists Association of Alberta is also providing pro bono counseling with priorities for healthcare providers during the pandemic. And then here's some resources for seniors, caregivers. So Senior Center Without Walls, it has a lot of great virtual programming. Caregivers Alberta is another really great resource. Stop Abuse in Families in St. Albert, they have some really good information on how to prevent elder abuse, how to support older adults who are experiencing elder abuse. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation, and my apologies for going a little bit over, but we'll allow some time for some questions. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Adam. What a rich hour of just resources and ideas. If you have questions, if you want to post them in the chat or the Q&A, and while people are doing that, I'm going to add all of those resources to our website COVID resource page. And as you said, also this webinar and all of them are being posted in the blog later as recordings. Some upcoming webinars you might find helpful. There's one on loneliness. Every week on Wednesday, Grant Wardlow is doing a mindfulness meditation, and a lot of people have been really enjoying that. If the ones you've missed are posted, and you're welcome to join as many of those as you're able to. Also one on applying positive psychology, using connection to nature for self-care during COVID, one on hope, maintaining recovery. So by all means, please take advantage of any of them you can, and share the recorded webinars with colleagues if you'll find that helpful as well. Just looking for questions here. A few people saying thank you very much for a great presentation. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing this one, Adam, with our team and forwarding it to all of the caregivers that we have as clients. Yeah. A lot of the talks that we've done, and also some of the groups that we're offering. Right now, Adam is doing a grief group remotely, and we're also trying to launch a group for moms with new babies remotely. If anyone has ideas for any of those things, we're just trying to figure out as we go, along with all of you, how to help in this time. So send an email. Yeah, someone's asking about sharing it, and absolutely go to the blog on the River's Edge website. Good. Someone is asking about the grief group. It is too late to join this one, just because we worked so hard in the first couple of sessions to get that group, create that safety and that sharing. But the good news is that we offer it twice a year. So absolutely, just send us an email if you'd like to be on the wait list or sign up for the next one, or if you're interested in individual grief counseling as well. Mm-hmm.
I see two questions, Nicole, so maybe I'll just try to
Oh, they're over there. Yeah.
briefly answer. So the first one, absolutely. So I think working from home, question about having blurred lines. So I think one of the ways that I don't know if I can fully answer the question, but I think definitely being intentional about finding maybe different spaces in your house. I think sometimes just leaving that space. So maybe having a different space that you can take breaks, that you can go to just to break up your day, setting a boundary. So when work is done, to try to close down your browser, close down your email, that kind of thing. I think that safe space or safe place exercise can also be a nice way just to take a 5-minute daydream, take a 5-minute break in your day. In terms of intentional self-care for that, I think that those morning rituals. So even though you're working from home, just to allow yourself to really indulge in, even if it's just pouring yourself a cup of coffee or tea, just to take that moment to savor. I hope that soothe the senses, to treat the senses. That's a really good one. So working from home, maybe you're in your pajamas, maybe you are you light your favorite candle. I think any little ritual, anything that you can do just to make the experience a little bit more positive, a little bit more comforting for yourself. And then yes, so definitely a challenge is with the heaviness of burnout is a lot of the things that we used to be able to do are not possible right now. So I totally get that. I think that's such a challenge, and that's why I know I shared some resources for self-care, but it's hard right now. And I think for peer support, I would say as healthcare providers is huge. It's a huge protective factor. Finding space to talk about your feelings. Sometimes it's journaling. So I think creative expression. So when we talk about sharing our feelings, it doesn't necessarily have to be with another person. It can be through art. It can be through journaling. Those can be some helpful tools.
I'll just,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, I'll just add, Cynthia Smith did a webinar last week, connecting with others in a time of disconnect. She did something really neat where she used the work around what your love language is, 5 different love languages, and then went through each one, not just in terms of how could you fill other people's bucket in the way that's most meaningful and effective for them, but also in terms of your own self-care. With a little bit of time that you have for self-care, making sure you make the most of it by doing the thing that really most makes you feel cared about. And yeah, I loved your suggestions too, because they just resonate so much with me around how do I remind myself of my own efficacy and successes as a caregiver, and why it is I do the work that I do. Those times I just can't find time for self-care, I'm just really fueled by those reminders and just tapping into that too. Someone saying they really liked that idea of the letter to a future self. Yeah, that's a powerful suggestion.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, I can just speak from personal experience. I had no idea when I wrote it in January that I'd be opening it in the middle of coronavirus. And I think a reframe, a perspective shift that can be helpful is just to imagine that what we're doing now to take care of ourselves, to care for, and also to care for others is really challenging. It's really hard because of so much going on. And what we're learning, the lessons we're learning, the growth, the personal growth we're developing right now is only going to pay off in the future. And I think by writing that letter to our future selves, we can really create a little bit of certainty. So maybe on June 15th, I'm going to open this letter. And I know for sure that on that day, I'm going to be able to offer myself some compassion, to remind myself that I'm strong, that I'm resilient. So
I love that. It's so just the way our brains are built. We focus in on our failures and shortcomings. Absolutely. So that's such a brilliant exercise to help us really notice our resilience. Someone is asking about a healthcare peer support group through River's Edge. Actually, that's something I've been considering doing. So if people have an interest in doing that, yeah, I would consider offering that. If you just want to send an email with a note of interest, that'll help me as well. Yeah, it's hard to know what's most helpful to people. People are getting support in different places, hopefully through their, work environments, but sometimes it's nice to get away from that. And all of the research around trauma shows that when we have an ability to process things in a safe, non-judgmental environment soon after a difficult event, that in general, as humans, we're really resilient and we may not carry the trauma of that event. So it's just so important to have those safe places. So let me know for sure. Yeah, a couple of people just noting interest in the grief session. Yeah, just send an email to info@riversedgecounseling.com about anything in that way, or to me, Nicole@riversedgecounseling.com, if you have ideas, about support or questions about this or other webinars. And if you have questions for Adam as a follow-up to his presentation, I know you'd be happy to answer them. So I could just forward them along to Adam as well, for sure. Yeah. So we want to respect your time. We're at the end of the hour, and thank you for your participation. That's what's really made these webinars so meaningful. And thank you for this first step in your own renewed self-care plan, hopefully, in being here today. I'll answer, a couple more people have asked again about the recording. So if you go to the website and you go riversedgecounseling.com, there's a blog, and I try to get them up within a couple of days or so. And so as I'm able to do that, I'll post them and you can see all of the past ones there. And also you can go to Adam's page and it will for sure be cross-posted there as well, along with the PDF of his presentation. Yeah, they're saying thank you, it was great. Well, thank you to each of you for the work that you do. I know we cannot thank enough all of the people who are professionally and personally caring for the people in their lives right now. And it really matters. The work that you do matters greatly. And thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you, Adam.
Really. No problem. Thank you, Nicole, for hosting. And yeah, thank you all for just everything you do. And no matter, I think the key takeaway for me from this has been helping comes in so many different forms, and each one, especially right now in coronavirus, is important and matters. So yeah.
Good. Okay. Take care, everybody. Be well.
Thank you.